have so much to cover today, so I want to go ahead and dive right in while people are still joining. For those of you who I haven't met before, I'm Nicole Wood. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders here at Vida. We are a leadership and career coaching company based here in Chicago, but with coaches all throughout the country. And our mission is to help people love their lives, which is the meaning of our name. And it kind of came out of a time when Forum, my co-founder, and I were objectively not loving our lives. We were pretty burned out in our careers and both found our way to coaching and to that support system and thought, wow, this is such a powerful resource that everyone deserves access to. So how can we do that? Because at the time, it was pretty much reserved for the C-suite. And it felt like this needs to be something that I can relate to, that I can see a coach that I see myself in, and that can become a lot more accessible. And so that's what we set out to do. And oh my gosh, it pains me to say 7 years later, as much as that is wonderful, but making me feel old, we're still doing it. And then honest leadership, this came about a couple years ago because leadership's a hard gig, whether that's leading a team, leading your own individual practice, leading yourself. It can be lonely. It can be confusing. And so I was like, how do we get the cheat sheet and learn from really smart, talented, and honest people like L'Oreal, which is what this is about. And we want to learn from your successes. But even more, we want to learn from your challenges and your vulnerabilities. And that really is what this book is about and what we're going to talk about today. And that's what we're here to do. So over to our guest. L'Oreal Thompson Payton is an award-winning journalist, motivational speaker, and influencer dedicated to inspiring others to trust their dopeness. Named one of Modern Maya's 18 Black women we think are phenomenal, her work has been featured in publications such as Bitch, Bustle, Hello Giggles, People, Self, Shondaland, Well and Good, and Zora, just to name a few. As a writer, L'Oreal expertly blends refreshingly confessional career and life advice with inspirational insight and just the right amount of humor. She does this by authentically and vulnerably sharing her lessons learned and imperfections while bringing her readers along with her on the journey. Welcome, L'Oreal.
Hi,
We're so
thank
happy
you so much
you're
for
here.
having me. Again,
Yeah.
yes.
Your bio is so spot on in describing your writing style. It's truly that perfect blend of the authenticity and the inspiration and the humor. Like when I saw you refer to early Justin Timberlake as ramen haired, I basically like spit out my coffee and was like, yes, this book is wonderful. It's so great. This is the book. If you haven't bought it yet, you're going to have a chance to win it on this this conversation. We're giving away 3 books. We'll do one shortly, one in the middle, and one at the end. But even if you do win, you should buy it anyway, because maybe a friend needs it. It needs to end up in someone else's hands who can change their life. Yes, we have it in the mail already. We'll drop in the link multiple times so that you will have no trouble finding it. But I'm so excited to dive into it. So without further ado, let's do our first one. Jillian, are we ready to give away a book?
Yes, I love it.
Okay. All right, let's get scrolling.
I feel like I should do like a drum roll in the background or
something. Let's do it. Drum roll and stop. Who's our first winner? Pick me.
Marsha Scribner. If you can send me your message me privately your email address, that would be awesome.
So look for Jillian from Vida and message her your email address, and we'll get in touch with you to get you your book. Congratulations. Okay. You are our second, I was wondering how to say this, Baltimorean? Is that the word?
Yeah.
A person from
Baltimorean.
So you're our second Baltimorean in a row on Honest Leadership, which is just so fun and exciting. And I want to start there and start kind of rewinding back to your childhood to understand a little bit more about how perfectionism came to be in your life. And I love all the stories that you share about your parents, and they seem to be such wise and supportive and wonderful characters in the book and in your life. And so tell me a little bit more about them, about your upbringing, and then how you think that perfectionism came to be in you.
Absolutely. So, I mean, to give you some context, my dad, he retired in 2012. He was a former firefighter, Baltimore County Fire Department, and went 32 years, I believe, without ever taking a sick day. So that doesn't mean that he should not have. It just means that he didn't. And my mom just recently retired as of last November. So I grew up with a very strong work ethic, and one where, I mean, it wasn't until adulthood, I think, that I took my first sick day, just because it was really much instilled in my sister and I that, you know, you work hard. And it was funny when I saw the, I think it was like season 2 opener of Scandal, when, you know, Papa Pope tells Olivia, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And I love that scene because, I mean, first of all, Joe Morton is a phenomenal actor. And secondly, it gave language to something that I had experienced in my life, but didn't really understand that that's what it was. Like growing up as a young Black girl, I mean, my parents are, I think they're technically boomers. I forget exactly where the generation cut off, but that was exactly, you know, the motto. That's how you got ahead in life as a Black person in America. You did have to work, and I think still do, if we're being honest, because of the way our society is set up, twice as hard, in my case, as my white counterparts to get ahead, because it's like a double minority sort of thing. I'm Black and I'm a woman, so I have to work
Yeah.
that much harder. And it's certainly, paid off. Obviously, my career been very successful, and it also came with a price of exhaustion and burnout and all of these other things, and kind of like mental health struggles that came along with that quest for perfection that we all know doesn't exist.
Yeah. Was that overtly like communicated to you as
Mhm.
a child, or was that like learned behavior through seeing how they operated?
Very much learned behavior. It was certainly implied. They never like sat us down and gave us the talk in that way.
Yeah.
But I write in the book, I remember vividly interviewing for a summer camp in middle school. It was at what would become my alma mater at Loyola University, Maryland. And they had this Loyola Leaders and Scholars camp for students back in the day. And you had to interview for it. And we went with my Sunday best, like this Easter church kind of dress that I had on, you know, tights in the middle of Baltimore humid summers, which was just awful, and like a portfolio essentially. My dad had made this 3-ring binder with all of my report cards and certificates and everything to essentially prove my worthiness, that I deserved to be there. And that was kind of the first introduction of that twice as hard to get half as much, because I
Mhm.
can't simply like just, you know, show up and be me. You know, you have to
Mhm.
prove yourself, prove your worthiness, prove that you belong. And I learned that it was instilled in us at a very young age.
Yeah. Um, it's so funny. I like found myself chuckling along as you described the perfect attendance thing, because that then translated from your parents into you. And that is
Mhm.
just a funny metric that we even have in school,
Right.
that like you get a certificate for like, yay, you didn't get sick. But I related to it so much. My dad was a government employee. My mom was a nurse. Same thing, like never missed a day.
Yeah.
Also, my mom being a nurse was like, drink some water, take an Advil, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
There
Right.
was very little sympathy
Yes.
for any of that, or she could see through the BS. But I remember like a vivid experience of being like pretty ill and forcing
Mhm.
myself to go to school, because I was like, oh, I have to get that perfect attendance.
Right.
So the fact that you called out that same experience, I was like, that's so funny. And then bringing it to now, where you had that same kind of commitment to this somewhat arbitrary thing with a Peloton streak you were
Yeah.
on. And I was like, what is that? And it is so much of what you're saying. And I want to come back to the having to work twice as hard to get half as
Mhm.
much. But I also think there's this relationship with perfectionism and control. And it's one of those
Yes.
things that we can't control whether we get sick, but we can control if we show up, or we
Mhm.
can control if we get on the bike. How do you think about that relationship?
It is so complicated, right? Like when I was thinking about getting Peloton, it was the CEO at the education nonprofit I worked at the time who convinced me, because you know she's a go-getter, she's ambitious, she's a CEO, and she has a family, and if she can do it, then so can I, right?
Mm.
And so I bought it right before the pandemic. It got delivered January 2020, and fast forward 600 some days later, I lost my blue dot streak. And so, for the uninitiated, the blue dot is what you earn every time you log in and complete a workout, whether that's on the bike or one of their strength classes, yoga, guided meditation, whatever have you. And I was so committed to the streak that I even listened to one of the meditations in the car on the way to my scheduled C-section at 3:30 in the morning, because I was like, I cannot lose the streak. And I knew it was inevitable. And the perfectionist in me wanted to do everything that I could to control the situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I had written about that experience and losing the streak because it happened about a month after our daughter was born. We were running around a doctor's appointment and just, that whole newborn phase and fog, really. And it was like 12:01 when I realized I hadn't logged a workout or meditation, yoga, whatever for the day. And I cried real tears, which is very embarrassing when I say it out loud because, like, why am I out here crying over a workout app? It seems so silly. And it was like in that moment, everything came crashing down where I realized, okay, like real life going to happen. You're a mom now. Your priorities have shifted. And so therefore, so have your goals and your routines. And, you don't have an hour to work out leisurely in the morning like you used to. And after some therapy to unpack what that meant about losing my streak and writing for it, and well and good, my editor actually was very helpful in helping me process because she had commented in the revisions, was like, well, what was it? Like, why were you so attached? And it was that control aspect. I mean, if we go back in time, this is during the pandemic for the most part of it. The world around us is literally falling apart. We had just started a very arduous and long IVF journey. And so that was something that I couldn't control. Peloton and that blue dot streak was the thing that I could control in a world of chaos, and losing it meant losing some of that control, but then realizing afterward, I'm still the same person. I'm still the same
Yeah.
L'Oreal. I'm still worthy of love and all of these good things without logging in every day. Like, I don't have to prove myself in that way. I don't have to earn respect and love. I'm still worthy without that as well.
Yeah. I love that kind of mental shift. And it's funny. And as I was reflecting on it, and I shared in the newsletter this week, like I used to say I'm not a perfectionist because like I'm okay. Well, like I'm a total person, like ship it. It doesn't have to be perfect, get it out the
Mhm.
door. So when it comes to work product, if I'm saying it's not perfect, then that's okay.
Mhm.
But if someone else makes that assessment of my work product, it's very much not okay. Or the standard that I hold
Yeah.
myself to, if I've committed to something like getting that blue dot every day and I lose it, then that's not okay. And I
Mhm.
realize that all comes back to that control, and that like this is how I'm proving myself is by saying, here's what I'm in charge of and what I can control, and
Yeah.
here's what's not. And so it was really it really rocked my world in reading through this book and thinking about, wow, I've actually been lying to myself about the components of perfectionism that I do have. I
Mhm.
want to think about, because you kind of touched on it already, like becoming a parent and how that changes your relationship with perfectionism. And I'm curious because I think about it. I also have a young daughter, and in some ways I feel like it's made things worse for me, or like
Mhm.
exacerbated perfectionism. And then in other ways, I feel like it's helped so much because you're so in touch with this like childlike piece of you, and you realize
Yeah.
how much stuff is out of your control. So how has that shifted for you?
Yeah, I mean that the losing the streak, I think, was the first instance where I realized, okay, parenting and perfection do not go together. They do not mix. And I was writing the majority of this book at the same time as becoming a new mom and dealing with everything that comes with that. And so it was a crash course. I say both becoming a mom and a first time author at the same time, and unlearning perfection, learning that, okay, I used to be a very punctual person. And I took a lot of pride in that. My dad would always tell me and my sister, to be early is to be on time is to be late, and to be late is unacceptable. And part of that is, again, going back to the stereotypes and being a Black person in America. You can't be late, you have to be perfect, you have to be early so that you are, considered worthy and belong at the table. And so that was definitely ingrained in me. And what that doesn't allow for, what perfect attendance awards don't allow for, what blue dot streaks on Peloton don't allow for, is life. Shit happens. Can we cuss here? I don't even know. I just,
We can cuss. We'll give
okay.
a warning in case anybody has
Yeah.
kiddos around. We're probably
Yeah.
gonna cuss.
Just a little bit to keep it real, but it's like life
It's a tasteful
happens.
cuss.
hastily. 6 days happen. You get the call in the middle of the workday that your child has a fever and you have to pick them up from daycare. Like life happens. And so you're going to lose the streak. You might be late because there's a blowout on the way to the wedding and you have to change them in the
Mhm.
parking lot. That's a real story that happened a few months ago. And I had to learn to relax and just kind of be like, okay, you know what? This isn't the vision that I had going into this. I used to be a plan A or bust kind of person. And now there's plan A,
Mhm.
B, C, D, like just learning to be more flexible and adaptable. It's been a very humbling experience because there's
Yeah.
been so many times where I'm like, that's not the way I saw that going down. And I'm learning and unlearning at the same time. I mean, my mom, very much hard worker, both of my parents, but I also saw the stress that the perfectionism took on her, and I want to show my daughter a new way, a softer way, especially me being a Black woman and her being a Black girl and knowing what we're up against in the world. I want to show her that it's okay to be soft, it's okay not to be perfect. You do not need to go to school if you don't feel well physically or mentally. I think we also need to expand that idea of wellness and, like,
Mhm.
yes to the mental health days, even when you're in school. Like kids have feelings too, they have big feelings
Yeah.
they need to process. And some days they're just not feeling it. And that's okay. We don't have to constantly push, push, push and strive, strive, strive. We are enough as we are. And that's a very important lesson for all of us.
Yeah. I think relate to so much of that, and your plans go sideways. You children are so unpredictable. They're so humbling in a
Yes.
lot of ways. And at the same time, I feel like becoming a parent also, because you're looking for others because you don't know what the hell you're doing and you're looking for
Mhm.
community and you're looking for examples, it can increase comparison.
Absolutely.
And you talk a lot in the book about social media and people's kind of curated lives that they share. And so how has that factored in, especially as becoming a parent, or just kind of what's your relationship with social media now as you think about perfectionism and comparison?
It's complicated. I think it's gotten better because there used to be once upon a time on Tuesdays where I would avoid Twitter because that was the day everyone announced their book deals with the red and blue screenshot from Publishers Weekly and the some professional news, as you may have seen people tweet out. And I was jealous, because I was also working toward this goal and it hadn't happened for me yet. So I think that's something that has helped. I mean, I remember when I was younger, my mom would tell me all the time, and it would drive me nuts, like what's meant for you won't miss you. And I'm like, yeah, mom, whatever, okay. But like, she was right, and whatever. I'll admit it. And that has helped me gain perspective. Just because it hasn't happened for me doesn't mean it's not going to. It just hasn't happened yet. So that perspective has certainly helped. And knowing that my journey is going to look differently from someone else's. I write and keeping my eyes on my own paper. I think that's the thing. Social media is great because it brings a lot of us together. It can foster a lot of connection and community, but also comparison. But keeping my eyes on my own paper, um, easier said than done a lot of times. And there's a few people that I've had to mute because it's like, I love you and I'm happy for you and like celebrating your wins. And it's a little bit much for me right now to like
Yeah.
see it constantly, especially when we were going through IVF and it seemed like everyone else around me was getting pregnant super easily, just, like on a whim or whatever. And I'm like, I'm so happy for you, mute. And that's okay. And being honest, because I think sometimes we feel some shame and stigma around feelings like jealousy when it just means we're human. Like emotions aren't inherently good or bad. It's like about your reaction and how you respond to it and the power that you let it have over you. So yeah, have learning the mute button, and celebrating people from afar, keeping my eyes on my own paper. As we talked about being a Baltimorean beforehand, and I remember vividly this scene from the Olympics with Michael Phelps, and forget who he was swimming against. It was a swimmer from South Africa, but there's this still that I can see vividly even now where Michael's like locked in, looking at the finish line straight ahead, and the other swimmer had turned and looked at him, I guess, to gauge like where Michael was, and it cost him the race, like a few fractions of a second, because that's how close, the what do you call swim matches? I don't know. I don't know what I'm a cheerleader,
We have
so I don't.
any swimmers in the chat can tell us
Yeah,
the
a
terminology.
swim meet. Thank you, Sylvie.
Meet.
Appreciate it. So yeah, he turned around and looked, and I mean, is that what cost him the race? I don't know, but like you have to wonder.
It didn't help. Yeah,
it didn't. It certainly didn't help, and I feel like that's the same in life. You got to keep your eyes on your own paper, stay in your lane, and not get distracted by what other people are doing.
Yeah, I like how you share that, because number one, it sucks that you're jealous to begin with. And then it sucks that you're mad at yourself for being jealous and the shame that you feel around it. Like the jealousy alone wasn't enough punishment. But that it can really truly be for genuine people you love and enjoy. And that still doesn't mean you can't establish a boundary or press mute or do what you need to do for your own well-being at that point, which I think is something I hadn't thought about in that way, and like giving myself permission to do. And I love the like keep your eyes on your own paper. And I think some of the stories I loved the most in the book on this topic were with you and your BFF Pam. It's Pam, right? Yeah. And it's so hard when it is someone so close to you that you love and you want to support and be there for, and also it hits so close to home. And I think, I mean, there's a million examples I can think of with that all the time. And I'll like Forum, my co-founder, probably every 6 months we'll go out to dinner together and we're both in tears. And I'm like, I don't feel like I'm delivering on this. And like, I'm not doing this as well as you. And it's like, well, that's not the point. I don't need to do that as well as her. That's why she's there. I need to do what I do best. And it takes, you know, some lasagna and wine every 6 months for us to like open up and share that. And I love that you were able to have that moment with Pam. Will you tell us a little bit about that story and what went on?
So I love this story because it's so many things. It's Black girl magic. It's friendship at its finest. It's women empowering other women. And it was the height of the pandemic. I remember it was 2020. And for context for everyone, like I've been working on some version of this book since 2015. From the book proposal and creating and everything like that has been a long, arduous process. And because I went the traditional publishing route, so for nonfiction in particular, you have to write the book proposal, and then you query the literary agents, and then you get an agent, and they have to shop it around to the different publishers for you to get the book deal. It's very long. And
I learned I had no idea how any of that worked until I read this, and I was like, oh my gosh,
it's a little bit of torture.
Yeah,
exactly. And my friend Pam, amazing poet, singer, songwriter, she's just extremely talented, self-published a book of poetry the summer of 2020 and told me about it. I was super excited for her. And I think it was like the next day or a few days later, I'd actually been at a bookstore in Oak Park, and I saw this greeting card that was like, I'm 97% happy for you and 3% jealous. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's that's me. And I felt that because it's about the both and. So going back to Peloton, Chelsea Jackson Roberts, their yoga instructor, absolutely love her. And she teaches a lot about the both and how you can hold these dual, sometimes in conflict feelings at the same time, because I think sometimes as humans, it's like, I have to be 100% happy for this person or in this situation or nothing. And the reality is it's usually a bit more complicated than that. And Pam, knowing me, being a great friend, could kind of sense that feeling and knowing my journey as well to become a published author. And we were on a Zoom just connecting because again, pandemic and couldn't meet in person. And I came clean to her about kind of where I was, how I was feeling, where I was mentally. And I was only able to do that because she, and being my friend, had created this safe place for me to be my authentic and vulnerable and messy self, right? Because to the outside world, it's like, I have to have it together at all times. I have to like be perfect. I have to put forward this kind of like facade and ignore my real, true human feelings. And she, and being the amazing person that she is, had created this soft place for me to land and be my vulnerable self and share her kind of mixed emotions around it as well. And honestly, that moment was very pivotal in our friendship because it drew us closer. And I feel like there were so many times with other friends that I didn't feel safe enough to be myself or to share my true emotions. And it could kind of create this little divide, or, create some space in that. And so it was a very powerful, raw moment of friendship, and just really, it really reiterated rather for me, that it is safe to be myself. There is so much power in softness and strength in vulnerability.
What did she do? Like, was it because she said to you, like, very directly, like, I'm feeling conflicted about this, and I'm sure this is how that's making you feel? Like, was it her general, like, the friendship that you had ongoing, or was it how she handled that moment that made you feel safe?
All of it. How she handled
Okay.
it in the moment, her having the awareness to know that what it was kind of like, parallel, because I feel like there's so many between a real baby and a book baby. But I
Yeah.
had some friends, while we were going through IVF, tell me that, hey, I just wanted to let you know, like, before they made the social media announcement, they would, like, pull me aside and tell me that we're expecting, and I just wanted, be mindful of your journey. And that's, I mean, no one, like, owes you that, right? Like, no one owes you explanations
Yeah.
or feelings or that sort of thing, but it's just a testament to really strong and good friendship when someone is mindful of your journey and is able to hold space for you and knowing what you're going through, and keep that in mind. And I have in turn done that to other people as well, when I know, like, hey, this news is about to break, and I just want to
Yeah.
let you know first, so you can have some time to sit with it and mute me if you need to. Like, I've always been very candid about that with people as well. We always have this tendency, especially because social media is such a highlight reel, to only see people's wins and everything like that. And I want to give people full permission to, if you need to mute, if it's a little much to take in right now, I totally understand, because I've been there, and that's okay. Like, take your time. Your mental health and your peace is so important, and you have to protect it at all costs.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So much I can relate to. And have had similar fertility challenges and have had friends who've done something similar where they're like, I can think of one in particular where she was like, hey, I feel really bad sharing this news, but like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of you, and this is this. And I'm like, hey, I'm super happy for you, and that gives you space to hold both of those feelings
Yes.
versus people who avoid or whatever it
Mhm.
is. And then that feels so much worse, like, oh, they weren't even thinking at all. So I love how you frame that up. And I think that's such a good model for how we can be on both sides of that coin, both
Absolutely.
celebrating and being mindful, and then
Yeah.
also being the recipient of that as well. So you are a published author now. So we're going to give you
We
a
did
big round of
it.
applause. We're here. Everyone just
Yeah.
give a cheer in the chat for L'Oreal, because this is such a
Aw.
big week. But while you are a published author, this is not your first book. Tell us about Dinosaurs in Outer Space. We're rewinding again,
Yes.
and what that experience taught you.
So it's so funny, and I really got to dig through the archives at my grandparents' house and see if I can find it. But when I was 6, so for some context, in the summers, my sister and I would spend at our grandparents' house while our parents were at work. And I had this homework paper that I used for homework during the school year, but then was just kind of like hanging around in the summer. And so, yes, dinosaurs. And it was illustrated. I, at 6 years old, wrote and illustrated a book about dinosaurs in outer space.
Do you still have it?
I don't have that, but I had the newspaper that I wrote around that same age as well.
Okay. Oh my
So
gosh.
very foretelling, like foreshadowing, in all of these summer activities that I did at my grandparents' house. And I remember that day that I wrote it, and my dad came to pick us up after he got off for work, and obviously, asked like, well, what'd you do today? And I was like, I wrote this book, and I showed him, and I was so proud of myself. And he was like, that's great. You should add it to your summer reading list. And I love libraries, still a big library fan. And I panicked in that moment, because I was like, well, this isn't a real book, Daddy. Like, I'm not a real author, because I'm thinking of, books that are on shelves and in bookstores and at the library, and I'm just a kid. But his logic was, if you wrote it, then you read it, and so you should add it to the list of books that you read over the summer. So I took his advice, and I was really nervous when we went to the library for me to turn in my sheet, because I thought like the librarian's going to look at the library card and look at this list and realize that the name like L'Oreal Thompson is the same person, be like, what is happening here? You're a kid. I don't
You
think.
had a line in the book. It was something like, I wasn't sure if you could die from embarrassment, but I was terrified I was about to find out. And I was like, that is
Yes.
just the cutest line, because I can see little you just like, oh my gosh, am I gonna
I
die
was
from
so,
this
that was my
mystery?
first taste of imposter syndrome, because I was like,
Mm.
she's gonna find out and I'm gonna lose all my library privileges, which like nothing more devastating to a 6-year-old reader than losing your library card. And so of course nothing like that even happened. I got my shirt and life was good. But that moment, and it's very full circle, because I have an event at Evanston Public Library coming up next weekend. When my family was in town, I took my dad to see the poster, just because it was just like, without him, and I dedicate the book to him as well, because he believed in me before I believed in myself, and really fostered that creativity, supported me, believed in me, cheered me on, and pushed me to put myself out there. So without him, without that moment, without dinosaurs in outer space, then we wouldn't have Stopped Waiting for Perfect. So it's just,
Yeah,
like, shout out to my dad. He's the best.
that's amazing that he recognized that in that moment to challenge you to do that. And I was thinking about this because I had an experience like that this week. I was talking to actually a corporate client of ours, and we were talking about like which days you go to the office and hybrid schedules and all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. And as I'm talking to her, I'm like, yeah, but yours is like a real company, and mine's like just this little company that we're over here. And
Mhm.
I've caught myself doing that. I'm like, no, wait, we are a real
No.
company.
Yeah.
And I was feeling like that, like standing up in front of the librarian as I'm talking to this successful person in this large company. And I'm like, but mine's real too, just because
Yeah.
it's not the same. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean it's not real. And here I am like feeling fraudulent to even describe which days I go to the office. And so
Mhm.
we're still doing it, even
Oh yeah.
though we know it. But I love that we can recognize it now, and we have language for it, and we can catch ourselves in those
Yeah.
moments. We have a question. What was the name of the newspaper that you wrote called? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I know because I was still in Baltimore at the time. It had something like Baltimore Kids or something along those lines. Like it was a newspaper for my classmates, and whole budding entrepreneur journalist, even at a very young age. So very telling of who I grew up to be today.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so cute. Um, we talk about we've talked a bit about your childhood, and then I want to kind of talk about a shift that happens because you have these prominent characters that are your parents, and maybe some of us had coaches or teachers or mentors that kind of shape us in those early days. And Vanessa, who you quote in the book, says, I also grew up in an environment where I was always coached, and not having that in my 20s and 30s caused me to start second guessing a lot of things.
Mhm.
Um, how does that transition take place for perfectionists? What happened to you in particular? And then the other kind of concept you call out is this like 30-year power outage that happens for women. So as we lose maybe some of that guidance that's pushing us, or start to question ourselves as we're coming into adulthood as women, what takes place and why do we start doubting ourselves around that time?
Yeah, I remember reading that Teen Vogue article about the camouflage, and it was so great to finally have language for what I felt in myself happen. And at the time, I was working at Girl Scouts, and I could see happening in some of our girls as well. And so the concept is, and I look at my own daughter, who will be 2 in October, and is very vivacious and confident and no fear whatsoever, like jumping off of anything and just like completely fearless. And my friend's daughter, who I describe in the book as well, at the time when she was 5, she told me when she grew up, she wanted to be the first girl president of the United States. She wanted to be a ballerina and an Olympic gymnast. And it reminded me of like when I was a similar age, I wanted to be Janet Jackson's backup dancer, a doctor, and an astronaut. And in your 5-year-old mind, all of those things are possible because you don't know self-doubt, you don't know the realities of the world, you don't know imposter syndrome or any of those things, because it all seems attainable, and it's possible, like it's within your reach to do all of these things. But as we get older and we go to middle school, which is the worst, and I know Erin's on here and she does a lot of leadership training for young girls, and I just commend her because it's so crucial. Middle school is hard, puberty is hard, adolescence is hard, high school is hard, like that whole time period and that camouflaging part, where there's essentially the power outage, right? Because you can go in grade school, and I know for me, I was super confident, always raising my hand, always on the dean's list and everything like that. And I credit going to an all-girl Catholic school, even with its politics, but having that safe space of being with my peers and all girls, I feel like the power outage hit me a little bit later because I was in an all-girl setting. But there tends to be, in college and then in the boardroom and in other places, of employment, where the second guessing starts to creep in, the self-doubt starts to creep in. Hewlett Packard had that study that looked at their internal candidates for positions and found that women will say, well, I need 100% of the qualifications on the job description before I even think about applying. Whereas men are like, well, I got 60%, I'm gonna go for it, right?
Mhm.
And it's just kind of like, oh my gosh, like why do we do that? I know I'm guilty of it. I have friends who have done it as well. And for everyone watching, listening, like, spoiler alert, the job description is not gospel, right? Like it's a wish list essentially for the recruiter, the hiring manager, but they are not expecting a unicorn who checks all of the boxes. So if you've got most of the qualifications, by all means, please shoot your shot and put your name in there. And I love what Vanessa said, to bring it back to your question about, for the first time after college, right? We don't have the accountability, or even in college, right? Because, we're not living at home. Some of us, we're on our own for the first time. No one's going to force us to go to class. No one's going to wake us up if we happen to sleep in. And then you're kind of like a fish out of water afterward. And I certainly felt that, where especially, I did all the right things. I had the internships, I had the grades, I had all of the things I had been working my whole life for. And then 2008 recession hit, and the job that I got, earlier in the spring semester was rescinded right before graduation. And I was like, well, now what do I do? Like, I've spent my whole life working hard, overachieving, getting the grades, getting the internships, following the rules. And it didn't pay off in the way that I was told that it would. And so that was a very jarring experience, kind of unsettling. And my first experience in learning, that like, okay, well, life doesn't go according to plan all the time. You can't always outwork yourself to success. Like, life happens, things happen. And so you have to be flexible and learn to roll with it.
Yeah. It's funny because I had like a similar but opposite experience where I did all the right things and I like cold called my way into my dream job. And then I did get it and I got to go do it. And then I was miserable. And I was like, oh, well, what now? Because I got exactly what I wanted. And I'm still me. And you talk about that in your book too, where like you can change careers, but you're still you. So unless you figure out what you need, what your boundaries are, what you want for yourself, you're taking that same situation and just plopping it in a new context.
Wherever you go, there you are, right? Like, you can't outrun yourself, and all of those things are going to follow you. And I've learned this in switching careers multiple times now. It's like, if I don't set boundaries, if I don't get clear on what it is that I want and I need, those same issues, that same burnout and overwhelm and stress is going to follow me no matter where I go.
I want to go back to, because you touch on it with women and how they perceive job descriptions versus men, but I want to talk more about Black women in particular and the concept around having to work twice as hard for half as much. And there were a couple quotes that I wrote down that really stood out to me from the book. There's this universal understanding that you have to be perfect. There's that word again, to even be considered for something that your white peers would take for granted having access to. So like it's they have it and we have it and we're not even thinking about it. And you're working so hard to even just get a chance at it. And the other one was, there's a lot, and I know we talk about imposter syndrome, and I feel like there've been a lot of kind of counter arguments to
Yes.
imposter syndrome lately, which are valid. And also, I wanted to highlight this because you wrote, it's easy to feel like an imposter when people constantly treat you like an imposter. And so, what are those two things, and how does this perfectionism and imposter syndrome uniquely experienced by Black women?
Yeah. And it's like, and I can't obviously speak for every Black woman. Everyone has their
Yeah.
own unique experience. And what I've seen, which has been very interesting with this conversation around imposter syndrome, because when I first started writing the book, and like fun fact for everyone watching is that this was not the original title or the original topic. It kind of evolved. Like the original title, Trust Your Dopeness, it was about overcoming imposter syndrome explicitly. And in writing that and learning that the title was copyrighted by a major global conglomerate, we changed the
Oh,
title.
I didn't know that was why the name changed. Okay.
Yeah, very, very sad. RIP to Trust Your
Mhm.
Dopeness. And I love this title because it's just like the whole process was very humbling, and learning to go with the flow, which as a perfectionist was, not something I'm used to doing. And so it evolved to include imposter syndrome, perfectionism, self-doubt, because they're all related. They're like all first
Yeah.
cousins hanging out in the family group chat. And what I since writing the book, imposter syndrome has exploded. Like when I first had the idea, it wasn't really the trending topic that it is today. And there has been a lot of conversation, to your point, and a lot of counter arguments.
Yeah.
And my take on that is it's all true, right? So it's racism, it's sexism, and imposter syndrome for me. There is the feeling, because the textbook definition is talking about people who are high achievers and have this like long list of accolades and achievements and still feel self-doubt. And so I know that to be true for me. And I also know that there are these external factors taking place as well
Yeah.
that make it harder for me than someone else to get ahead, to strive in the workplace, to get the, six-figure salary and the really impressive titles. And so it's like going back to Chelsea, the both and, like, all of these things can be true at the same time. Siri, no one's talking to you right now. So sorry about that. I don't know if anyone else's Apple Watch does that, where it just like picks up what you're saying and responds, and you're like, I wasn't even talking to you. So yeah, I have just found, all of it. There's the self-doubt that I have of, okay, do I belong in this room? Do I really deserve a seat at the table? And the factors of, I know that there are white men, white women getting paid more than I do, even if I have more experience, right? I found that in different positions that I've held. And it's very interesting. I wrote an article for Fortune as well about just how Black women are not given the benefit of the doubt, right? I cannot fail as extremely and as gloriously as someone like Adam Newman of WeWork, who like tanked this one company, and yet investors turn around and give him millions of dollars to start another company. In that sense, is kind of laughable because it is so ridiculous. That's like, wow, okay, I would never have a chance to even do that. And so there's like all of these things happening at once
Yeah.
that come into play, for people that from marginalized and historically underrepresented identities.
Yeah. I have like 7,000 questions, and we could chat all day that I want to ask you. But I want to make sure that we leave time, because I'm sure there are a million questions from the group. And part of the perk of being here is we get to ask our questions of you directly. So
Yeah.
what I will kind of wrap things up with is another quote that you wrote that I really appreciated. And you said, I'm not sure it's possible to overcome self-doubt altogether. Rather, my goal with this book is to help you shorten the spiral cycle. And as someone who lives firmly in the middle of the spiral cycle much of my life, I just appreciated that so much. And the book for me was a huge step in the right direction to shortening that. So any kind of, if there's one thing we take away, or like skip to this chapter if you're busy and you really need to get there, like what is it that what's the overarching message that you want us to take away to shorten that cycle, while knowing that even the most successful people have self-doubt?
Yeah, your inner critic is lying to you, right? Their whole job, their goal is to keep you safe and in your comfort zone. But as we all know, that's not where the magic is. And so when the self-doubt is getting loud, when your inner critic is screaming at you, when the negative self-talk becomes too much to bear, to take a step, take a breath, sit down, get quiet, get still, and then determine what is true. I write about keeping a feel-good folder that's full of compliments that people have sent you with your work, or whatever it is that is just like the nice things that people are saying, because our inner critic can get very loud and very aggressive sometimes. And so we need to take a step back and look at what it was that that other people are saying, because sometimes we believe other people more than we believe ourselves. And just a picking friend with fear. Like, fear is inevitable. Fear can be a good thing, right? Because it means you're leveling up and you're pushing yourself out of that comfort zone. The fear, for me at least, doesn't go away. But it's about making friends with it, keeping it in mind, and going forward with it, like feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Failure is not a bad thing. I know that's like kryptonite to a perfectionist, but I had a very wise woman CEO once tell me that fail is a first attempt in learning, and that has stuck with me for a long time and giving me permission to fail. Perhaps not as gloriously as Anna Newman, but to know that it's okay if the first iteration isn't perfect. It's not supposed to be. It's the first draft, or it's the first part of it, but you don't get to make it better. You don't tweak it. You don't get to the good part without first taking that first step and taking it, even if you're feeling fearful along the way.
Yeah, I think we expect that there's going to be this like evolved version of ourselves that arrives one day, and we're not scared, and we do the thing, and we're not doubting ourselves. And it's, to your point, it's a lie, and we're going to always feel that fear, but it's about pushing through it and taking that next step, and that one little action that then helps us take the next one and the next one. I love that. Thank you so much, L'Oreal. While everyone, we already have some questions coming in, which I'm not surprised about. While more are coming in and you're thinking about your questions, Jillian, let's give away another book.
Sounds good.
And stick around till the very end, because we'll give away one more. L'Oreal, while you mentioned that, one thing we'll include in our recap is we actually have a template for a brag book. I know you talk about your kind of feel good folder and the brag book. We have one that's kind of those two things combined. So we'll make sure we share that with you all. We love a template. Don't reinvent the wheel. This way you have it and you can start dropping your stuff in there on a weekly basis. I love it so much and go back to it all the time. So yes, we love a template. All right, you ready? Are we ready, Jillian? Let's drum roll again.
Yes, ready.
All right, stop.
Natasha iPhone. Please feel free to send me.
What a great last name.
Yes, Natasha iPhone.
Send me your email address, please. Thank you.
Perfect. Yay. Congratulations, Natasha. Okay, let's get to some questions. Okay, let me see if I can scroll. Okay, this is a big one. Writing a book while mothering a now almost 2-year-old. Our kids were born right around the same time, and I can't even imagine writing a book while becoming a mom. How did you do it? You're amazing.
Thank you. I will be perfectly honest and say that it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life ever. And I joke in the book that like the baby was easier than the book because there's help, right? Especially once she was in daycare, I was like, okay, I got this. There are people who can help raise that's the village that comes into play, right? But the book was just me. I had to sit down and put words on paper, and it was very hard. And part of the reason the new title, the title that it is today, is Stop Waiting for Perfect, because literally we were brainstorming different names. It was like a Google Doc of 30 alternates. And I was just like, in the midst of writing the first draft, and had written a newsletter about it. It was just like, I have to stop waiting for perfect, the perfect moment to sit down and write the book at the coffee shop with the latte and the background music. Like, that only happened 2 or 3 times in the course of writing this book. A majority of it was written in my notes app during the 2 a.m. breastfeeding sessions, right? Or it was before everyone got up in the morning. I think going forward, and when I write another book, I will be a bit more strategic and intentional about carving out dedicated book time. But at the time I did the best that I could with what I had, and snuck in those moments in between the full-time job and the baby and everything like that. But it was very difficult. 12 out of 10 would not recommend. But it was just like the timing of everything, right? Like we finally got the positive pregnancy test February 2021 and the book deal in May of 2021. And it was like these two goals that I had been working years toward happened to culminate at the same time. So I rolled with it, but it was that was also unlearning perfection, where I was like, and even reading, I narrate the audiobook, and I was reading through some passages like, oh, I would change that, or I want it, but I can't. Obviously, it's already like out in the world. But I've been learning to let go of perfectionism in that way, and kind of the done is better than perfect. So it's out there. If we get to write another edition, then I can make some changes, but at least it's out in the world, and I can say that I did my best. So.
Yeah. I almost wonder, like, if it, as much as like, don't recommend, if it was sort of a blessing in disguise and literally forcing you to have to do it in that way, and I like major kudos, because I feel like all I did during those late night breastfeeding sessions was like order things on Amazon that I didn't remember when they then showed up in my
I did that too. The both and.
But there's one thing that you said that I've been thinking a lot about, and you were like, I can't remember at what point, but you said I was struggling to kind of get stuff out because I was editing myself as I was writing. And I realized like my job is not to be the editor. My job is to be the writer and get it out. And I'm trying to do two people's jobs. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, in whether I'm creating something for work or whatever I'm doing. Like, is my job right now to be the editor, or is it just to be the writer? And I love that mental shift. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, question from Hannah. So powerful failure. How do you deal with perfectionism when you make a mistake, especially at work? We get praised for never messing up, and that reinforced the idea for me that perfectionism equals success. So when I get rejected or mess up, it shakes my self-worth to the core. It's so hard to let that go.
Yes, I feel that. I mean, if it makes you feel any better, one of my biggest work fails was when I was doing nonprofit PR and I sent out the press release before the embargo was lifted. So there's like this date where it's allowed to be public, and I had pitched it beforehand, and I was really, because we're, again, going back to that inner critic, we are our own worst critics. And unless you are like a doctor, surgeon, or something else where someone's life is literally on the line, then it's okay. Like when I worked at Girl Scouts, because that's where I had the big mess up, I told myself, like, it's cookies. We're not curing cancer here. We're supporting the girl who someday might, and that's great. But me, myself, and my work and what I'm doing with press releases and pitches is not going to end or change the world in that way, or someone's going to lose their life, right? So that's one perspective part of it. I remember distinctly when the mistake happened, and I was terrified because I was young, and I was like, oh my gosh, our VP is going to fire me like on the spot. I owned up to it. I apologized once and promised to do better in the future, because mistakes happen. We are human. And I credit my therapist at giving myself learning to give myself grace in those moments and self-compassion. One of the exercises she helped me with was talking to myself as I would a friend. So would you beat down your friend and tell her like, oh my gosh, you're so dumb. How could you do that? You made a mistake. You're, a failure and everything like that. Of course not. You would never. So why then are you talking to yourself that way? And it's hard as perfectionists. We hold ourselves to an extremely high standard, an unrealistic standard, if we're being honest. And so it's very it's an exercise, it's progress, it's something that I'm constantly working on, of forgiving myself first, right? Because again, we are our own worst critic, apologizing for the mistake and then moving on. And I think that's the key part, because we can dwell on it and we can let it consume us, but you have to, make like Frozen and let it go, because it's not going to end the world. And it's easier said than done, but it gets better. And you have to realize too, like, as I grow, as I put myself out there, I'm going to get rejected. I'm going to make mistakes. And that's actually a good thing, because it means I put myself out there in the first place. And that's not something a lot of people can say. So you get brownie points for the courageous, like vulnerability and putting yourself out there to begin with, and everything else just kind of take it in stride. And that perspective, I feel like, is really helpful.
Yeah. I love a framework. So I love the steps of like own it, apologize once, like,
Yes.
and then let it go and move on. And I think maybe another kind of unspoken step here now is like share it. It's so helpful to hear
Yes.
from other people the mistakes they made. I don't know if you've seen like on Instagram, like the roundups people do of like in what you messed up when you were an intern. Have you ever seen those?
No, but that sounds amazing.
Okay, I'm gonna send it to you because they're so funny. And I remember being an intern and totally messing something up when I was in consulting. And my boss at the time was like, don't worry, when I was an intern, our whole project was to build a database. Like that was what the client was paying them, I don't know, 6 figures worth of fees to do. And he deleted it on his first day. He deleted the whole thing. And I was like, okay, I feel a lot better about whatever email mistake I made. Okay, I think we probably have time for one more question and then one more book, but we'll make sure we capture all of these and find a way to get your questions answered. L'Oreal has a ton of events. So if you're in the Chicago area, I think, are the rest in Chicago?
Yeah, 2 in Chicago and Baltimore next month as well.
And Baltimore. Okay, so you can go and see her in person at these events, and I'm sure ask any additional questions. And make sure you're following her. It's at LT in the city, right?
Yes. Everywhere.
Everywhere. Okay, last question, and then we'll move to the book. What did you find was most helpful for you on a daily basis to fight off perfectionism and self-doubt? Sometimes it can prevent you even getting started with the smallest first step.
That's a really great question. And the truth is I still struggle with it, right? Like earlier this week, I was on CBS Mornings and it was that was my national TV debut. And I was just like, holy crap, this is Gail King sitting across from me. And do I even really deserve to be here? And the answer is, of course, in any of these scenarios that you find yourself in is, yes, you do. But I try to, when I can, take some time to meditate. It helps me just to get quiet, to journal. Gratitude journal is really helpful to just kind of take stock, going back to that social media and being comparison of like what I have, and being grateful for that. But honestly, and it's gonna, I don't know how it'll sound, but my daughter is a really great accountability partner. Looking at her, and my therapist challenges me in situations that are hard or where I'm doubting myself or I'm struggling in some ways, like, what would you want Violet to do? And so I think about that to be like, okay, and then I want you to do that. And it's really that leading by example and showing a different, softer way for future generations, especially as a Black woman, have a Black daughter. I know how much, is stacked up against us in society. And I want to pass on a legacy of her to rest, of imperfection, of being at ease and soft and gentle and kind to yourself. So if I want her to do that, then I have to do it as well. And so, extending myself grace, but also knowing that she's watching, right? Like even toddlers pick up on everything you do. And so that keeps me accountable and learning to let go of the perfectionism.
Yeah, there's such a little mirror to you. It's too funny. Thank you so much, L'Oreal. That was incredible. We appreciate your time so much. Let's do one more book giveaway. And can we also drop the link to purchase the book in the chat so everyone can go buy it like immediately right now if you've not yet? Okay, let's do our last drum roll. Jillian, you ready?
Yes, ready.
Okay, stop.
Oh, I forgot the drum roll. Okay.
I may mispronounce, but Janira Herrera.
All right, Janira. Whoop whoop. Awesome. Make sure that you DM Jillian with your email address so that we can get in touch with you to get you your book. Congratulations to all the winners, everyone. Thank you again, L'Oreal. We're so excited for you. We're so grateful for bringing this book into our lives. It's right here. Stop waiting for perfect. Go grab it, and grab another copy for your friends and for your daughters if you haven't yet. Thank you for being here. This was incredible, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.